Hello and welcome everyone to the now being recorded conference. Tonight we're going to be looking at Apex classes some more, particularly looking at Invocable Apex, which allows us to connect Process Builder to Apex classes. And we'll be working a lot more with working with multiple classes, passing arguments back and forth, and OHAD has constructed a utility class for us that we're going to build our own string method later. Having gone to Dreamforce last week, I was seeking out sessions that seemed like they fit well in with our class topics, and one of the best ones I attended was about Invocable Apex. And this came out probably about a year ago, I think. But it allows us to connect Apex classes to our process builders and to Flow. So this kind of sits in a nice place between doing pure Apex and doing pure workflow or Flow. And one of the big advantages is that when we set it up that way, because we can activate and deactivate the the flows and process builders and workflows in production, we essentially give ourselves a feature toggle. Feature toggles are something that we often build into our applications. So if we, for example, have created a Apex lead assignment application, that we can turn it on or off in production without actually having to replace the code. But being able to use Process Builder or Flow allows us to do that without having to update the code. All right, so I'm going to give us a review of what we've done in the last two sessions, since we have some folks who were not at both of them. So let me go ahead and start sharing my screen here.
And we can see a developer console.
Perfect. I'm getting good at this now. All right. So 2 sessions ago, we started building triggers. And initially, we put all of our logic just inside the trigger and had it do all of the functioning. In our examples, we just updated some fields on contact. And then our last session, right before Dreamforce, we took it an extra step, and instead of doing our logic in the trigger, we passed the records from the trigger to the class. And that's so here we're looking at a trigger that is passing records to two different classes. Our first one in this if conditional says that if the trigger is insert and is after, therefore it's covering our after insert event, any contact records should just be sent over to the class called contact after insert, and specifically to the method called setContactDepartmentIT, and it passes trigger.new. That is the list of all of the contacts that were qualified for this transaction. So that would be all contacts after they had been inserted into our Salesforce org. And what it does next is it goes to the contact after insert class, which I have here. And that class is sitting here waiting for a list of contacts. Actually, the method is waiting for a list of contacts. So this is the setContactDepartmentIT. And here we can see in its arguments that it is expecting a list of contacts. In order to operate, it must get a list of contacts. So when we send it trigger.new from our trigger, that satisfies that requirement. And it renames it to cons from trigger. That's the variable name that we would use inside the class. And then in this particular class, we follow a common pattern that we use for doing updates to records. We first set ourselves up with an empty list where we're going to park any contacts that we want to update. Then we go into our loop, and we do a loop on contacts, giving them a variable name of con_in_trigger for each of the contacts that we get from that list of contacts. And when I highlight that variable name, you can see that it also does it up there, so we know all the places that we reference that. As we loop through all of our contacts in this trigger, we have to use another common pattern where we open the already inserted contact for writing. Since it was inserted, it was locked and in read-only, so we want to be able to reopen that so we can write to it and set its department value to IT. And then we add it to our list, and after we've gone through the whole loop, we do our update. So this pattern is a very common one. It's one we've seen a couple different times, and tonight we'll be looking at the Invocable Apex that also uses a similar pattern, also passes arguments back and forth, but we're going to evolve our Apex a little bit. To introduce that, of course, I want you to be able to get your hands-on experience from this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create what we call a utility class. So utility classes are classes that we might end up calling from a lot of different classes or test classes or even triggers. They don't necessarily do the same type of automation that we might see with workflow or process builder. And in this case, the one that we're going to write, I'm putting up here on the screen, is called PBB Utilities. The PBB is for Process Builder Blocks. These are building blocks for Process Builder. And we'll be creating a couple of other classes that depend on this one. And this is a nice, simple 3-line class that will dedupe any list of strings that we send to it. And what it does is it expects a list of strings, so that's the argument. But unlike the classes we were just looking at for the contact trigger, this one not only is expecting to receive a list of strings, but this one also has a return value or a return data type. When this is called, it's going to return another list of strings. And what this one is doing, as the name implies, is it's deduping that. So if we send it a list of 10 strings and 2 of them are the same, it's going to return a list of just 9 strings without the duplicate. This is particularly important when we want to work with IDs and doing DML, such as updates or deletes. Because if you send a DML a list of records that have a duplicate ID in it, it will fail and it'll throw exceptions and things will stop working. So being able to dedupe it is a very useful utility to have. Now you don't need to do this all the time, but there are certain times when you realize I better dedupe what's coming into my Apex, and this is a nice simple way to do it. All it does when it gets that list of strings in the argument is name that string input, and then it's using the set type of collection to handle the deduping. A couple of sessions back when we were looking at collections, we learned that sets can only contain unique values, as opposed to lists, which can have as many duplicates as we want to stuff into it. So all we do here is we create a set, we name it output, and then we just provide the list of strings as the argument for our new set. So you can always populate a set by providing it with a list, or vice versa, or you can populate a list by providing it with a list. But in this case, since we're feeding a list of strings to a set of strings, it'll handle the deduplication for us. The final thing that we have to do, and this is something that Apex will, or the developer console will start throwing errors until you get this return phrase into your code. We have to return that list that we initially said is going to come out of this method. So here in the method declaration, we said this is going to return a list of strings, and here's where we actually do that. And we're just sort of reversing what we did with the set and the list. Now we're creating a new list, and we are feeding it the set called output, so that returns it back to a list. So we started with a list, ended with a list, and just deduped it with a set in between. What I'd like you to do now is type in these 3 lines. Build this PBB utilities class in your own developer console. You don't need to include my comments. I just put those in there for some helpful guidelines. And after the class, I'll go ahead and post this, but I wanted to force everybody to get their hands on to make a few mistakes and learn how to spot the errors. And of course, as you're typing this out, if you get any errors that you just can't solve, if you've made sure that every semicolon is there and the other formatting is correct, let us know, and we will see if we can troubleshoot it with you. So I'll give everybody a couple minutes to type this one in, and then we'll move on to using it in our Invocable Apex classes. And when you've got your class finished, go ahead and just type done in the chat window so we have an idea of how many people have finished and how many haven't. And I'll compact this a little bit so it's a little easier if you want to do a split screen. Maybe I can fit this in the top half of your screen while you work in the bottom half.
Looks like Bill is already done. And
Yep.
Jennifer is also done. Record speed today.
Sounds like Brooks is in voyeur mode.
Yes.
And if there's anything in this PBB utilities class and the dedupe method that you don't understand, if you don't understand what part of it is doing, please ask. This is a very basic class. It doesn't have a whole lot of working parts, and I want to make sure that everybody understands all of these parts. If we have to take an extra 5 minutes to discuss that, an extra 10 minutes to figure it out, that is well worth it. Knowing these things is crucial. And these PBB classes were written by one of the Salesforce developers who was presenting at Dreamforce. And actually there's a repo on GitHub that has about 8 or 9 different classes. We're just going to look at 2 of them tonight, along with this utility class, but there's some other very useful ones there.
I'll post the link to the to that in the chat if anybody
Okay,
wants
and
to
I'll be
look at it
sending it
later.
around. I'll send it around in the email tomorrow morning with our follow-up notes from the meeting.
I thought that was a phenomenal idea when I looked at it.
Rachel, I'll make sure I get you all of the information about how you can view the other recordings. I've been posting them on OHOD's and my New York Developer User Group meetup, and we've been saying that it's about time for us to put these all somewhere. So I volunteered OHOD's blog. What is it? force.cloud?
Yeah, forced.cloud.
So
I'll get everything posted there over the next few days, maybe over the weekend. Sounds like everybody's asking the same question. So
yeah, I was getting a lot of that at Dreamforce too. So I figured it's time to start compiling it. All right. So hopefully now most of you have gotten the class to save. If you are trying to save and it's throwing errors, go ahead and chat at us or speak up, and we'll step back and take a look at that. But now we're going to move on to creating one of our classes that will actually hook up with Invocable Apex. So we're going to start with a very simple one. This is a class that will allow you to lock any record. If you've ever set up an approval process, you know that you have the option to lock records that are submitted for an approval process. And about 4 or 5 releases ago, Salesforce finally responded to the idea that we would like to be able to lock any record anytime. And so they gave us an Apex means of doing that. But sometimes we want to be able to do that if we're working from Workflow or Process Builder. So this is a class that will allow us to do just that. So this class is very simply called PBB Lock. And as you can see, it has just 3 lines. That's all it takes. I'm going to jump to line 4 here because this is where our method is. I just wanted to point to this first to then be able to go back a line and say this is an annotation. So we've run into annotations one other place. That is when we were creating test classes. We always had to open our test class on line 1 with the annotation @isTest. In this case, to turn a method into an invocable Apex method, we have to start it with @invocable method. And then we also have to give it an argument. We have to give it a label. This is what's going to appear in Process Builder when we want to choose from all of our invocable Apex. So I'm calling this one lock a record. Now going back to our actual method declaration on line 4, we have our usual declaration, our sort of default settings of public and static. And we've gone back to void. We don't need this to return anything. And we've named it lock record. And then the Apex lock process requires that it gets a list of IDs. And if we wanted to look this up, if we wanted to know how do we know that, well, and that's something we would find in our developer notes. Let's see what happens when we Google approval lock. And I'm going to throw in Apex as part of my query for good measure. And looks like I find the release notes, although I think I'm going to go to this one. I usually like to get the developer guide because it's often more thorough. If the release notes have come out over a couple of different releases, we might not see all of the information, but the developer guide is always reliable. And so here we are in the approval class and approval methods. And the one we're interested in is locking a record. So I find this here, and I'm going to click on that. And that takes us down to this one here, lock record ID. And when we look at this, what we're seeing is another method. So lock is the method, and it's saying that we must give it a record ID as the argument. And it goes on to explain that in a little more detail, that it's the data type of an ID, and that the return value, it says, is approval lock result. Well, we're not actually aiming to get that particular return value. We're satisfied to let it be void because we know that we'll be able to look at our record and see as a reason that it was locked as a result. Notice here that there is also a second entry, and the only difference is that this one says it accepts record IDs plural. So that means we can either send it just one ID at a time, or we can send it a list of IDs. And this is
by the way, this is a good point to just bring up. So how can you create a method that can accept either one single ID or multiple IDs is a very interesting concept. We see this with a lot of other methods. For example, if we try to use string.valueOf, we can pass it a date, we can pass it in integer, we can pass it a decimal, and it will always convert it to a string. So that is something that is called overloading a method. And if we have some time today, or maybe on the next session, we probably will talk about it in a little bit more detail. But it is actually possible to set up a method that accepts different types of inputs. And that allows us really to create kind of a utility that does a lot of different things. So just a kind of a side note, and hopefully we'll get to talk about it in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for pointing that out. It's actually one of the things that I ended up asking the developer. I said, hey, if we're building these invocable apexes, what happens if we build a method that is overloaded? And he sort of looked at me and said, I don't know, I haven't tried that yet. So he suggested I try that and find out. So maybe I'll do that experiment on my own time and bring the results back to everybody in our next sessions. All right, so we know that we're looking for this one that accepts a list of record IDs. So why don't we head back over to our developer console and see how we did that. So here, we know that ultimately we need to get, if we're going to use the approval class with the lock method, we need to give it a list of IDs. Now we want to make this, this class and method super flexible. We want to make it so that it can work with any object, whether we pass it an account or a opportunity or a contract or even a custom object. So we're going super generic here. And one way we do that is we start by just passing it a list of strings. Now, string is a different data type than ID, but ultimately they are the same type of data. IDs are just a little more rigid in that Salesforce recognizes them as an ID, and they must be that either that 15 or 18 character format and be something that it can recognize as a valid ID in that format. We're going to make this a little more flexible by passing it a list of strings. We're going to give that the variable name of record IDs. But then we want to make sure that we are not passing in any duplicates. So rather than just immediately feeding our approval lock method our list of record IDs, we're going to call that utility we just wrote. And if you recall, that utility was also expecting a list of strings. So first, we get our list of strings here. We pass it into dedupe. Dedupe makes it a set, gets rid of any duplicates, and then returns it as a list of strings. And then we have satisfied the approval locks argument requirement of a list of strings. So now all we need to do is create a process builder to hook this up. But before we do that, I want everybody to be able to follow along. So I will give you another couple of minutes to start copying this into your developer console while we answer Rachel's question. Can you explain again why we start with the @ symbol? So the @ symbol is a convention in Apex that allows us to tell the platform or the compiler that this particular method does something special. And in this case, it's making this method available to Process Builder. So it is sort of an extra declaration in addition to the things that we added into the method, like the name and the arguments. Often these require extra arguments of their own. So this one, we have to give it a label so that we'll be able to see it in Process Builder. The other example that we looked at was the @isTest. Let me see if I can open up a test. Oh, I better not. Better leave it here because people were copying that, weren't you? All right. The other one.
So let me just add something. So annotation is basically telling Salesforce it assigns some kind of special property to a class that we write. And Luke mentioned the isTest. We now looked at the invocable method. In fact, does anybody on this call right now, can anybody think of some other annotations that you may be familiar with? Let's see if anybody here can think of something. Type in quick, isTest. That's good. We said that though, Jen. Any other ones? So Salesforce, I think, overall has about 10 or so annotations, maybe 15. So isTest is one of them. Invocable method is absolutely another one. Thank you, Bill. Future is another annotation which essentially tells Salesforce this method is going to run as a future method. We haven't really talked about future methods, but absolutely. There's also things like Aura enabled, which is Lightning annotation. There's read only, there's remote action, and there's just a few more. You can actually just Google Apex annotations and you'll get to a page that does it. So it basically just tells Salesforce, hey, there's, like Luke said, something special about this class. We want to be Salesforce to know that this class is going to do what it does in a special way. So hopefully that was just a little bit more detail.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get a chance to work with future methods before long, and we'll be using the @test setup next week when we really start to dig into unit tests, because we've been writing a lot of Apex the last 2 sessions without writing our unit tests. So we got some catch-up work to do. And for those of you, I know Jen Lee is done already. Hopefully a few others of you have gotten this invocable method written in your developer console. And again, if there are any questions, pieces of this that don't make sense, definitely stop us and ask. We definitely want to make time to really go through every step so that you know what it is. That said, we're not going to get too into what the difference between public and static is at this point. We will get to those. These are just these are the most common declarations when we establish a new test method, but we'll be looking at some of the other variations on that in future sessions. I think I went 3 years of writing Apex triggers, classes, and unit tests without ever using anything different or even understanding what they were there for. So you can get pretty far on public static alone.
I also want to talk a little bit about what the difference is between this PBB lock and the PBB utilities in the sense of the public static void versus public static list where you created before. So Luke did mention, if it's void, it doesn't return anything, and if we say anything, we provide any kind of data type, it returns something. But what does it mean really to say that the class returns something? So let's start with void. That's easier to explain. When you call a void method, all that it means is that we're going to run whatever is inside this method, and when it's finished running, that's it. It does what it needs to do, and it stops there. When we use some kind of data type instead of void, like the list of strings here, that means the class, when the class is done, it needs to, not only should, but it has to return a value that is a list of strings. Now, what does it mean to be returned? You've actually worked a lot already with classes that return stuff. If we use, for example, string.uppercase, usually string.uppercase, you'll put it, let's say, on the right side of a variable assignment, right? So look, if you don't mind typing, I'll just dictate something.
Okay.
So you can start by saying string and call it myString.
Okay. Where are we? I'm catching up.
Just type anywhere. I just want to show something. It's not related specifically to any one of these classes.
All right. Oh,
string myString.
If I try and do anything after the return, the compiler will complain. All right. String myString
equals string.uppercase. I think, no, it didn't complete that.
I think it's 2 uppercase, isn't it?
I think you might be right.
Let's see. I'll see if I can pop out the. There we go.
I think you're right. 2 uppercase.
There it is.
There we go. Just the first one.
Okay.
And then put something in the parenthesis. You can put, whatever. My name is. So what we're doing here, we're calling a method in the string class. The method is called toUppercase, and the method is returning a string. Because it is returning a string, Apex will expect us to put that string somewhere, which is why we have that left side of that line, basically saying, okay, we're creating a string, and what do we want to put in it? We'll put something, and then the string.toUppercase returns a string. So the same exact way, we can, instead of putting it inside a string, we can put it anywhere where Apex expects to get a string. It can be in parentheses inside something else, or anywhere else really where you would just put a variable that is a string, for example. In the same way, when we return a list of strings, we can either put it into a list of strings, or we can just put it into somewhere that expects a list of strings, just like approval.lock. So I hope that kind of makes sense. We will look at methods that return things further later this evening.
Thank you, Ohad. All right, I'm going to pull this back out of here, get back down to just the pieces that we need here. And Rachel said that she was getting an error that said found at symbol and expecting left curly bracket. I'm going to see if I can force that error here in my own. So let's see. I might be able to get it if I separate at from the invocable method. And see what happens when I try and save that. No, it didn't mind that, although I don't know what it would do if I actually tried to run it. Might also, let's see, if it was saying expected left curly bracket, it's probably referring to this one or this one, but that means that somewhere back up here, something was amiss. Let us see if we can...
Can you, Rachel, are you able to post your, to just copy your class and post it in the chat?
Or if you solved it, we'd love to know what it was. Let's see, how do we get that one?
Here we go, class, blah, blah, blah.
I bet it's public.
Look at publics. You wrote publics with an X, which means nothing to Salesforce.
Somebody must live in the Southeast or have spent time in the Southeast. I think about Publix at dinner time a lot. All right, let's
so everybody else could not really see what Rachel posted in the chat, but there was really simply a typo. Thank you, Luke. Interestingly, you're getting a different error.
Different error for me.
Let's see, I'm just trying to see what she did different.
There's also an error in BBB utilities. I doubt that would change that to the...
It might evaluate something else first. Sometimes the way it evaluates the errors is not sequential.
Yeah, usually with the errors, when you get them, it'll give you something like it's saying unexpected token static. So that's the static it's referring to. And I usually start looking backwards from there. Mm-hmm. So that, in this case, it's pretty easy to say that that was the correction I needed. Now, let's see, label. Still looking over Rachel's invocable method. That all looked good. Public class, PBB lock.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what why it would give her that message.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything that looks too out of place there. Is there a, let's see, there's the opening parenthesis before list, closing parenthesis, after record ID. I think I have an extra space there that I don't really need to have.
Yeah.
And now I've typoed mine.
The thing is about debugging is that sometimes you might find that the debugger gives you errors not sequentially. So you'd expect it to find the first error first, and then the second error, and so on. Sometimes you may fix an error, and it may find another error before that error you just fixed, or after that error you just fix. It really depends on how the compiler runs to the logic, which is not just like we read it. It's a little weird we could not replicate that exact error, but
yeah, maybe maybe you and Rachel want to jump into collabedit.com and see if you can get.
Well, she says it works now. It's safe now.
Oh, it does?
So,
all right, we're good. All right, then let us look at how we hook this up with a process builder. So if everybody got this to save, we're going to jump over to our UI now. And we're going to go here in Process Builder. Now, of course, I wanted to make sure that this was going to work, so I set one up earlier, but I set it to inactive. So we're going to open that one up and examine it. And we'll see what's in here. Starting with setting up my process builder, I chose to make this work on account. And rather than having it lock records every time a record is created, that seems a little heavy-handed. I went to when a record is created or edited, so I wanted it to be a little bit more flexible. And then moving on to my criteria, I set a criteria. I'm just going with a very simple one here. And the criteria is account name. And I chose to do it for account names that start with the string closed. And that's the only condition. So anytime a record is either created from scratch or edited and starts with the name closed and finishes with anything else, it's going to kick off this action. All right, so let me go over to this action. I'm actually going to delete this action if I can remember how. Gosh, how do you?
You have to click, I think, cancel first.
That's so funny. I don't think I've actually ever deleted.
No, I deleted. It should be there.
Maybe it's because I've got my screen.
Oh, it's read only. You got to clone it.
Oh, right,
You'll
right.
read only.
Okay, there we go. Okay. Hopefully now I get the, yes, there's the delete. Okay. All right, so let's, so we've set up our app process builder for account. We've set a criteria, which is the name equals closed or starts with closed. Now we get to do our action. So as soon as you click the add action, we get the standard add action page. And here in the action type, we have a choice of Apex. When we choose that, we of course have to give it a name, lock closed accounts. But now that we have some invocable Apex, it shows us all of the labels from any method that I have created that has that @invocable method annotation. So the one we were just working with is lock a record, but I've got two others in there. We're going to take a look at delete a record in a few minutes. I also had one called add permission set to user. As soon as I pick lock a record, it prompts me to provide it with variables. Those are the arguments that we set up in the method. Now when I go to add row, we get to a field that's pretty similar to what we've seen in other places in Process Builder. But when we click on this, it automatically goes and reads our method, and it says, oh, well, it was expecting a method called record IDs, or an argument called record IDs. So it actually feeds that to us for the field. And now we just need to feed it a record ID. So since this is account, I'm going to have to switch to reference. And then I'll find my account ID. Now notice that I could just as well feed it the parent account ID. This would work just the same. It would lock the parent. In fact, any ID field in here would do, at least if it's a lockable type. I'm not sure that owner records are lockable, but or user records, I should say, are lockable. But in this case, we're going to just lock the account. But seeing that you could actually do that to reference other IDs starts to give you an idea of just how flexible an invocable class like this could be. You could have it also lock all of the child records of an account, lock all of the cases or the contacts. Again, only using that one invocable method. So now that I've set this one up to just lock the account, I'll go ahead and save that and activate it. And let's see if it works. Now let me jump over. Oh, but before everyone does this, there's one strange little setting that you're going to have to find in setup if you want to get this working. That's why I left this window here to remind me to tell you this. In the setup section called Process Automation Settings, you can find that here in the quick find, Process Automation. There is a checkbox that you have to check and save that says Enable Record Locking and Unlocking in Apex. So before you create this, or before you attempt to use the workflow that we just added, you have to make sure this is set. I found out the hard way that it wasn't there. And well, actually, let me show you the email I got from Salesforce telling me that, because, hey, we're all about troubleshooting error messages too here. So this is the email I got when I tried to run it without having that check approved. And, so I start scrolling through it, trying to figure out what's wrong. And fortunately, this is uncommonly helpful error from Process Builder. It said Apex approval lock unlock API preference not enabled. Well, it didn't exactly give me a hyperlink to the process automation settings page and instructions to check that one off, but telling me that it was not enabled was a pretty clear indication that something needed to be enabled, and with a little Googling, I was quickly able to find that. But the rest of the information up here wasn't nearly as helpful, other than sort of telling me about what records I was working with. And Flow is not yet as friendly as we'd all like it to be, or I should say Process Builder and Flow are not yet as friendly as we'd all like them to be with errors, but they are getting better. And this one does give us some helpful information about what record I started on, so it tells me the account where I started. That's my user, the 005. Here's the account, 001. And it shows me that it was, I could just drop that into my URL and find my way to that account if I needed to. Particularly useful if somebody else does this and you want to see what happened. But it doesn't really get too into it, like what I actually changed. That's something that I really would like it to do. At least it tells us what rule it came from. So, all right, now let's see if this is actually working now. So I'll go off to an account, and I'll pick an account here. You can see that it's currently not locked because I can't edit it. I'm going to type closed in there. When I save it, we know.
Oh my God, it worked.
What's really cool is that because we use Process Builder and because we bulkified, or because we didn't have to bulkify this, but we did make sure that our PBB lock class accepts a list of strings, that means we can do this to multiple accounts at once. So I'll use my inline editable list view here to, I've already picked one of the wrong ones.
No, you just have to extend the column. Whenever the pencil is over the text, it goes into the record.
Right, but I had picked one of the closed ones already.
Oh, okay.
So, yep, I'm just not having...
Just extend the column width.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
Always,
So I'm just going to change their entire name to close since I can't simply append it in front of each one. And now I wonder, I've never noticed, I guess because I'm an admin I could still edit those conceivably, but of course if we open these,
yes,
we can see that both of them locked up. With only basically 3 lines, we were able to do something that we've never been able to do before with workflow or with Process Builder. And that is to be able to lock the record. So let's take a look at something else that we've never been able to do with workflow or with Process Builder, and that is delete a record. I can just see it now. Everybody's going to go locking and deleting records in their orgs and create all sort of havoc on Friday. But at least they'll be deduped. So, all right. So we're going to look at another slightly more complex class here, the PBB delete class. Now this one is pretty much the same. As you can imagine, basically if we're locking records or deleting records, in both cases we're working with a list of record IDs. So we can see that we have that there again. This time we're labeling it delete a record. The declaration is pretty much the same. We just have to give it a different method name. But for the delete, we actually have to recast the strings that we give as record IDs into an S object. So that's what we see here on line 6. So the approval lock is pretty friendly in that it will allow us to just pass it record IDs. However, delete is a DML statement. And Ohad, check me here. I might be going off into Luke's fantasy world of made-up Apex. But it's my understanding that DML expects it to be a very specific object type. So whereas the lock, we could just give a record ID, the DML, we actually have to tell it this is the S object that you are deleting.
Not if you cast it into S object like it's done here.
Okay.
So that's why you can see that you have this get S object type.
Right, but we couldn't just give it a list of strings, essentially.
No, that's correct. You can't just give a delete statement a list of IDs to delete. That's correct.
Right.
But that would be an interesting method to build, by the way.
It would be, yeah. All right, so what we're doing here is we're just sort of having to do something a little more elaborate to turn that generic list of strings, because once again, we're going to be able to use this with any object, or we want to be able to use this with any object, so we're going to design our class so that it is able to handle that. And just like we used sets and lists in our dedupe class to do some conversion, we're going to do a slightly different type of conversion now. We're going to convert the string that we get of an ID, and we're going to make sure that that string goes back to being an ID, and that we know what type of object it is. So as we've seen before, we like to set up an empty list to get ourselves started. And that's the list where we're going to use S objects. Now, before we've seen list things like contact. So when we were making our contact trigger and the class that went with it, we were using a list of contacts. A contact is an S object. Any of our standard objects or custom objects are S objects. And we can, in this case, use the just sort of abstract generic version of data type that is called S object. So this way we'll be able to use it with anything, contacts, custom record, custom objects, and so on. But other than that, this is just the standard format for setting up a list of records, and an empty one for starters. So then we have to go into our for loop, because here's where we're going to start converting the strings we get into proper IDs and into a defined S object. So here inside it, we've got our standard pattern for a for loop. It's just a little bit gunked up because we've done a few extra things in here. But we can see that we're doing a for loop on strings, and we're going to call each string record ID while it's in the loop, so that's the variable name for the string. And then once again, we call that PBB utilities dedupe on that entire list of strings that we pass to it, so that we get a deduped list returned from that method. So we just have a for loop that ultimately is working through each string in a list of strings. But we've just done it a little bit of efficient programming here by having that list of strings passed to another method and return back right in here. We could have done this outside. We could have added a couple lines, created another list, referenced that list in here. But this is an efficient way to accomplish the same thing. Now that we've got our for loops conditions established, our curly brace starts off the actions that this loop is going to do. And the first action we have to do is we have to get an ID. So we declare an ID, and we give it a name. We're going to call it R ID, R for record. And then this is something that Ohad just mentioned a few minutes ago. If we want to change things around one data type to another, value of is a very common and powerful way to do that. So we start by saying this is going to end up being an ID, and we use our dot notation to say we're going to use the value of, and we pass it that string, record ID, that we have in our for loop. So that's going to turn that string into an ID. The next thing we have to do is we have to figure out what type of record is this. So our next line, we set up a SObject data type, and we give it the variable name of SO. And now we're using a rather extended string of methods here, but we are starting with our ID. And for my purposes, I like to be consistent. I think the developer that I cribbed this from was a little sloppy, but this RID is the same one we just declared. So now it's getting an ID of a record, and then it uses a method called getSObject type. And that's going to let Apex know what type of record is this. If it passes it a contact, now it knows it's a contact. Or if it passes it a lead, it'll know it's a lead. And then we use dot notation again because we can keep stringing these along. And we tell it we're going to create a new SObject record with this ID. So now we've basically turned this, this string that we got into an actual identifiable record. So our final thing to do is just to add it to that empty list we called delete us. And we keep looping through all of the list of strings that we sent here. And when we get to the end of it, we use our DML statement, delete, to call that delete us list and to delete those records. All right, so that threw a couple new things in there, these SObjects and casting things from ID strings to IDs. So before we head over to see if this works in Process Builder, go ahead and hit us with any questions about pieces of this that don't quite make sense yet.
Hey, Luke, it's Brooks. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
I got tripped up with the, looks like line 10. I'm good up to rid.getSObjectType method, but then what's with the dot new SObject RID? Can you explain that part again?
Yeah, in fact, so that I get it more right than wrong, why don't we go ahead and actually Google this, and we'll take a look at how we would interpret this in the documentation. So I'm already in Developer Guide. I'm just going to drop that into the search up there. And it takes us to the SObject type class records. We look back at our developer console. You can see that here's a reference to that SObject type class that it's talking about. So let's read a little further here. All right, so we are looking at this one, new SObject, or more specifically, new SObject that expects an ID. I'm going to click on this, which scrolls us down to that one. And it says, constructs a new SObject of this type with the specified ID. So that's where this is a little bit imprecise in its language. So it's saying it's creating a new SObject, But with the specified ID, it's kind of already saying, well, we already have this record. It already exists, so we're not creating a new one per se. We're just sort of creating in memory. We're sort of saying, well, we need an S object to hold this during our code. And here's an ID of a record that already exists. So create this temporary S object based on this real ID from a record. And so by doing that, when we give it an ID, then we get this temporary S object that we can work with in our code.
Could you flip back over to the code while we're talking about that? Just trying to wrap my head around it.
Yeah, where is it? There we go.
So I guess I'm getting tripped up is where it says the new S object, but I feel like to your point as you just made too, the ID, like it already exists. So we're creating another one and then giving it the same ID?
Yeah, essentially, like even though it exists, we just need a representation of it, sort of a temporary version of it here in our code that we can call a generic S object that we're then able to delete. So we could have made this specific to, say, leads, and this would have been a lot simpler. In fact, I will go ahead and just throw in a lead version of this, so we kind of have them to compare side by side. I'll do public static void delete lead. I'll say list lead IDs. And really, like for this, I'm trying to think if I could probably even do it just as simple as delete lead IDs. Like it could absolutely be that basic. But for the purposes of trying to sort out what the differences are here, let's expand this a little bit beyond that. So I'll set up a list of leads again. So this is comparable to line 6. I'll call it delete leads. And I'll make this just, oops, I know I have typo there. List lead. So now I've set up an empty list. And let's say that I particularly like that quality of being able to use the dedupe. So I can do for lead, and I'll call it L in. Now normally, without the dedupe, I would just say lead IDs. I would just loop through my list. But we want to dedupe these, so I have to call that utility, PBB utilities. Then I have to name that method, dedupe. I have to spell it right, which is eluding me at the moment, and then put that in parentheses to feed it a list of lead IDs. It's actually complaining now because this is a list of leads and it just wants a list of strings. I'm getting that unexpected token kind of like Rachel had before. Where is that coming from? Those match up. Those match up. For these,
I think you're missing a parentheses in the for loop on the bottom.
Thank you. Yeah, that's right. There it is. Okay. Now we're back on track. I'm going to take out a few of these blank lines so that we can do a better side-by-side comparison here. All right, so now we're still staying pretty true to what we had before, but when we're working with leads, well, we already know that it's a lead. So really at this point, we would just be able to start saying, just add each of the leads in the loop to our list. In fact, I could even call this, just for real consistency. I could call it SO. Doesn't matter at all here. And I'm able to do that here because the DML is getting a list of leads. Up here, if I did that, it wouldn't be getting a list of leads. It would be getting a list of strings because that's all record IDs was. So we need to go through and convert it and first convert those strings to IDs. But then we also need to make sure that it knows that it's a particular type of record, not generic, but something specific. So here we're using this get S object type in addition to it. So let's break this down. So we start with a reference to our record. So we start here with this RID. And if we were to go and look up ID class, because that RID is an ID data type, so I can probably click through. I'm going to see if I can click my way through to ID class. Here we go. So once again, we're in our class, and I'm going to look down here at methods, and I find this get S object type. And what this tells me is that when I have an ID, I can use the format of that ID, so its variable name, followed by get S object type, and it's going to return exactly what type of object that is. So if we sort of want to, I'll do it in a comment here, if we kind of want to imagine what's happening here, S object SO equals, and that first part, RID, and get S object type, well, let's say we're passing it a lead. That's ultimately just going to result in it saying that this is going to be a lead record. And then it moves on to the new S object RID. And that's where it creates a new lead with the ID that we fed it. So really, this is just a programmatic way of allowing Apex to figure out what type of record it's about to create. There are definitely other situations where you use something like this when you get passed an ID and you need to know what type of record you're being passed in case you're getting, say, a list of like campaign members, which could be leads or contacts. And maybe you only want to work on leads. So you get a whole list of campaign members, and you need to figure out which of these are leads, which of these are contacts. So you might use get S object type in a loop to sort those out, and then you only add the ones that turn out to be a lead to another list to, say, create another campaign. Does that help, or do we need to grab OHAD in here to reinterpret leads?
No, I think
Thank you.
I think your description was very good. I mean, the idea is, everything we've done so far was very, very specific. We worked with leads, we worked with contacts. A lot of times, especially with utility classes, you want to create something that is much more generic and can handle a much more, large variety of inputs. We haven't even talked about dynamic SOQL and other things that allow you to create more dynamic code that can handle more kind of scenarios. And this is kind of our first foray into more of a descriptive area where we can take some data and figure out what it does and do something with it without even knowing exactly what we're getting when we're writing the code. So this class can really handle any kind of object that you give it. Of course, in this scenario, as long as they're all the same object. Actually, no. You could even probably do a different object on this. But
yeah, that's what I was just thinking too. You probably could feed this list. I'm not sure how you would necessarily get it.
I'm not sure if a list of S object would accept multiple types of object. That's the only.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was wondering about too. But for our purposes, since we really designed this to hook it up to Process Builder, we really were just designing it in a way that we might create 5 different process builders, one for accounts, one for leads, one for a custom object. We can use the same exact class over and over again for any one of those. So we could go off and hook this up to a process builder, but I know Ohad has some good lesson prepared for us, and I want to give him at least 45 minutes to work on that. So we'll skip doing another process builder, and I'm going to go ahead. If you are ready, Ohad.
I am ready.
I can turn the screen over to you. All right. Now,
okay, I've never done this, so let's see how that works.
Yeah, I've not actually turned it over to anyone either. So let's see. Right, so I'm going to stop sharing here. And even that's not so obvious. All right. So, let's see here.
Okay, I think you guys should be seeing my screen right now. Or not. I think, yeah.
I may have just clicked something that took it back.
Yes.
So whatever you did before, do it again.
There it is.
Okay. So hopefully you can see my developer console, which looks a little different than what you might have seen before.
I like yours. I like the color pattern.
So this is a little trick that I completely forgot about until very recently. I haven't touched it in a very long time. So you may not know that under your developer console, under Help, you actually have Preferences tab. And you can set up a few different things like your font size. And there's something called Theme. So you can actually change your theme.
Oh, that's awesome.
Something that looks different. And this one is called the Matrix, as you can probably guess why. I like also prevent logs on load, because a lot of times it tries to load logs that are very old, and then it will give you an error. Usually when I open the developer console, I don't really care about previous logs I looked at, so I like checking that as well. Okay, so what I wanted to do is I wanted to create some class that would demonstrate to us the concept of passing parameters and doing some work on these parameters and then doing some returns. So I thought to myself, a good example of this is uppercase. How does Salesforce does the string dot to uppercase? But we already have string dot to uppercase, so why create something that we already have? So instead, I created a method that is called toAlternate. And the idea with toAlternate is that it would use one character as uppercase and the following as lowercase, and then the one after that again uppercase, and so on. And so I created this class, and we'll go over and see how that works. So first of all, I created a class, as you can see, public class string util. And it's designed to be another utility class that we can call from wherever we want. And I have a method here, public static string. And as we can see, just the fact that we have here string means it's going to return a string. And I call it toAlternate. It will accept a string. And it will not only accept, it will expect a string. And we'll call that inString. So what we're doing here is actually, this code could be cleaner, meaning I could write the same function with a lot less lines, but I kind of wanted to go through this in a little bit more detailed fashion that we really have to, just to kind of go through some of the logic. So what I'm doing immediately, you can see that I'm going into a for loop. I'm setting up an integer I starting with number 0. I'm saying run through this as long as I is smaller than the length of the string that we get. And then every time that we iterate through this loop, increase I by 1.
Yeah,
I think we've all seen.
Do you think you could just zoom in the browser a little bit? The font is a little small
absolutely.
in the meeting. Thank you.
I'll use my preferences and make the font size bigger. Is this better?
Much. Thank you.
I do find that the dark blue, the variable name's a little hard to read.
Okay,
Yes,
I'll change.
It is.
I'll change this. I want to show off, and I ended up being.
Oh, I'm going to use this. I'm definitely going to switch to that.
There's one that I really like. I'm trying to remember which one it is. No, not this one. I can't remember which one. Maybe this one? Yeah. Is this is it read or painful? I'll just move it to the default, and that's it. I'm trying to show off, and it's not working. Which one is the default?
I know all of us are going to be switching these all around next time we're in development.
We need a Sublime Text style option with Java.
Yeah. There are some templates here that are very similar. Okay, back to where we were. So now we're basically iterating through a loop that is going to run as many times as there are characters in our string. And I created something called, which is I'm creating a variable, an integer variable. I'm calling it current character. And I'm using a string method that is called character at, char at. And char at is a string method. Again, if we use the developer guide and look at the string method, we'll find the char at, and it returns a value from a string from a specific character. So I'm getting the character that is in the string at the location I. So as I iterate through this, I will go letter by letter, and I will basically get that string, the character, I'm sorry, that we're on. Now, some of you may and some of you may not be familiar with this, but our letters all have some value assigned to them. So if we look at our alphabet, for example, capital A has a value of 65. Capital B is 66, and so on all the way to 90. Lowercase a is 97 and goes over until 122. So when I use this char at, I'm actually getting that value from the ASCII table. So that is something that may be a little bit more than what we've spoken about so far. And now what I'm doing, I'm saying if I is 0, actually I don't even need that or, I'm sorry. Let me just delete this. So let's say this. If mod of I over 2 is 0, so mod, if you are not familiar, is a mathematical method that divides a number by another number and returns what's left over. So if we try to divide 5 by 2, we'll get leftover 1. If we try to divide 4 by 2, there's no leftover. So what I'm trying to do here is identify if I am in an even position or in an odd position. So if it equals 0, it means I'm in an even position. And I'm saying here that in a comment, if this is true, then we are in an even location. And I'm creating here an alternate string, which is, by the way, a string that I defined here. And now I'm using another method called convert character, convert char. So we'll go over into convert char, and let's see what happens here. But what you can see, first of all, is I'm passing into convert char, I'm passing our current character, which was the integer, and I'm also passing the mod, which is either a 0 or a 1. Even number will be a 0, odd number will always return a 1. So let's go into my convert char method. You see that the convert char is a string, which means this one also returns a string. Both of our methods actually designed to return string. Convert char expects two values though. It expects an integer, and we'll call it in char. And it also expects another integer, which is conversion type. So I'm using this second integer to identify if I want to return an uppercase or a lowercase. And I put a note here just so that anybody that ever reads this class knows what contype values are. So if contype is 0, we'll always return a lowercase. In contype is 1, we'll always return an uppercase. And if contype is any other value, we'll always return it unchanged. The next thing that I'll do, I'll create another list of integer. And this is actually a little bit of a limitation in Apex. Unfortunately, I don't have, we do have the ability to get the char value, the ASCII value of any given character, but we don't have the ability to convert a character value back into a string. So the only way to do it is to convert a list of characters back into a list of strings, which is why I created a list of integers here. And we'll just process one record every time when we go into this class, one entity inside our list. So any questions so far before I continue going? Because I know this has been, how do I see the chat when I'm presenting, Luke?
Oh, if you click on the bubbles, the speech bubble thing.
Oh, I see it. Yep, I see it. Thank you. So let me see if anybody's typing anything. Okay. So, so now let's handle contype that is different than 0 or 1. So I'm saying if contype is different than 0 and contype is different than 1, we're going to add to outchar, to that list we defined here, we're just going to add the inchar, the same as it was. We're not making any changes to it. On the other hand, now we're trying to handle what happens when the incoming character is an uppercase or a lowercase. So if you remember that ASCII table that I looked at a moment ago, we know that uppercase is between 65 and 90. So I'm saying if the inchar value is between 65 and 90, then we know we received an uppercase. And now we need to figure out, wait, do we want to return an uppercase or do we want to return a lowercase? And that kind of depends on the input that we got in the conversion type. So I'm saying if conversion type is 0, and we said that 0 will always return a lowercase, and we already know that we got an uppercase because this if is only going to get us into the uppercase values, I think that I'd actually switched it over. So if this is an uppercase and contype is 0, it should return a lowercase, but I switched it around. So let's say if contype is 1, then we're just going to return the same value because we know that we already received an uppercase. Otherwise, we're going to return the same thing. We're going to add to our outchar. We're going to add the same value as incoming, but we're going to add 32 to it. And why are we adding 32? Because the position of every lowercase letter in the ASCII table is 32 digits above its counterpart in the uppercase. So 65 is uppercase A, 97 is lowercase a, and so on. So for any time I want to convert to a lowercase, I'll just add 32, and then I'll add that to my out character list. And now, if we got a lowercase character, which means it is not between 65 and 90, but rather between 97 and 122, I have to do the exact same fix, I'm sorry. So now we're saying if the conversion type is 1, which means we want an uppercase, then we have to take our lowercase character and reduce 32 from it to get the equivalent uppercase. Otherwise, we'll just return our in character. So all I've really done so far is I said if we got any other conversion type other than 0 or 1, I've added the same character that came in, I've added to my out character list. Otherwise, if conversion type is 1 or 0, I'm checking if it's lowercase or uppercase. And then based on the conversion type, I'm returning the equivalent or the correct character from the ASCII table. And then finally, I also have another else. And this else handles any other character other than alphabet, right? Because we only looked at 97 to 122 and 65 to 90, which is alphabet. But what happens if I pass a dollar sign? What happens if I pass a question mark? In that case, I'm just going to return exactly what came in again. So far all I've done is I've added just one value to my out character list. And the final thing that I have to do is return a string. And the string is going to use a string method called from char array. And it expects somebody is thank you, Hima. So this method expects a list of integers, and it will return a string. Now, because our list only has one entity, we will always get a string of one character. So once we return it, we're back into here, and we're saying add that to my alternate string. So let me try to recap. We created an empty string alt string. I'm iterating through every single letter inside my string. I'm using the char@at method to convert my current letter in the loop into an integer that represents the ASCII value. Then I'm saying if it's an even location, pass it with the value of 0 as a second parameter, and otherwise pass it with a value of 1. And I'm always adding it to my alternate string, the result. So this method will return one character at a time, and will continue to build our alt string until we're done iterating through the entire string, every character in the string. And when we're done doing all this, we're finally out of the loop. We're going to return our alt string as part of the original toAlternate method. So I hope everybody has been able to follow what I'm doing. And let's give this a try. So in fact, I'm just going to call this method from, what is happening here?
Now, what's interesting about this, I'm looking through this and thinking, before we had string methods such as to uppercase or to lowercase in the library, you would have had to do this. You would have had to do all of that ASCII by hand. You would have had to figure that out, convert each one by adding 32 to the ASCII character code for it to actually turn a string into uppercase.
That is correct. I mean, in the past, before you had complex programming language like Apex or Java or C, a lot of these things, programmers had to write every kind of method themselves, and that's exactly actually how the uppercase method works, where Salesforce provides it to us as a method. In the background, what they do, they actually wrote a class that does exactly this. It takes the value and always returns an uppercase value for any alphabet. So let's try and run it. You see that I created a string. It's called myString. And I'm populating into it the return of my toAlternate method. And I'm just passing something that has two uppercases in a row here, and then the rest is lowercase. And we expect to see one uppercase, one lowercase, one uppercase, one lowercase as a result. And so then I have a system debug so we can see the result. So if we execute this, and I look at debug only, we can see that our return string has an alternate case for every single letter. So I'll absolutely share the code with everybody if you want to look at it. Again, this code can actually be written a lot more efficiently. Salesforce has a method that will allow us to take an entire string and convert it with one command into a list of characters, so I wouldn't have to iterate even through all of them. Then I can iterate through the list, and then it also has a method that calls isAlphabet that allows us to check if it's an alphabet, and we can even say is lowercase or is uppercase to find out all that, and then it even has swap case method that will allow us to take whatever case it is and just swap it to the opposite one. So all of this could have been done very quickly and probably with about a lot less lines. But I kind of wanted to show. Yes.
It sounds like a lot of different ways too. All of those different methods you mentioned, you could probably use them in a half dozen different ways to get the
exactly the result. So I would absolutely encourage people to everybody on this call today to play around with this, because this is a great practice of using classes with parameters and calling and returning. And the other thing is, of course, just like Luke said, this is a great example to show that there's a dozen ways to accomplish the exact same thing. And none of them is necessarily better than any other, right? I mean, what I did here is maybe a bit more time consuming, but in reality, we're not even going to waste a lot more CPU, because when you call Salesforce swap method, it probably does the same thing in the background. So, play with this, feel free, look at the string method, and you'll see a lot of these different classes methods that I just described. And now, I wanted to, go ahead.
In fact, thinking about all those different ways, one of the things I often think of when I'm writing code is, I think back to when I was learning a foreign language, and particularly when I was living in a foreign country and had to express something. There were times that I came up with the most bizarre way to express something that might, I might, instead of knowing the word for corkscrew, I might have said the curly metal thing that opens wine bottles, but I got the message across. And as you start coding, that's kind of often what you do. I know when I look back at some of my code now, I'm like, wow, I could have done that so much more efficiently, but ultimately I got it to work. So if you're really stuck on writing something, sort of step back and think, could I do this another way? Can I sort of think of it abstractly and do this some other way? And you might just find another way to get to the same goal.
Sorry, my thing got muted. Raghu asked a question, where this will be used effectively in real-time scenario? I'm not sure exactly what your question. I don't know if you're asking if there's a reason to create an alternate text, a method that returns alternate characters. I can't really think anybody who would care to have uppercase, lowercase. Yeah, ransom note is a good answer by Walter. There's really, I don't think really there's a business case for this. But I can tell you that I have written some code for my company that we generate different license keys for our software. And to calculate it, we have to do a lot of iteration and changing strings. And we actually convert between string to integers, and then we convert even to hexadecimal. And so I wrote classes to handle all of these kind of conversions. So this is maybe not a specific example of something that's really useful, but there's absolutely scenarios where you'd use parts of this to do something that you need. So while Luke was going through the last class, I actually decided to write something else. And because we talked about overloading methods, I figured let's show how that looks. So I'll go back to my class, and this is still inside the string-util class. And I've decided to add a couple other methods. So beyond my toAlternate method, which the toAlternate method uses the convertChar method. But by the way, I could also just call the convertChar from anonymous code as well, or from anywhere else. because it is public. Well, we won't talk about that for now, but I could call that from anonymous code or from any other class as well. So now I created these other classes. These other methods. And what you'll notice is interesting here. I created a public static string, which means it's going to return a string. And I have a bunch of these. And you'll notice that all of them have the exact same name. So this is exactly how you create an overloaded method. If you want to create a method that can handle multiple types of input, you actually have to create separate methods for any type of input that you expect your method to accept. And inside that method, you will have unique code that handles that kind of input. So if you're expecting your method to accept a string and a date, it's probably going to do different things with a string than it will with a date. And so that's why you actually write different methods for what to do when we get a date and what to do when we get an integer. And so what I've done here, I've overloaded this method several times, I think 5 times. One time it's expecting to accept a string. One time it's expecting an integer. One time it's expecting an ID. One time it's expecting a date, and another for date time. And it always returns a string. Now, I've kept it very, very simple. I'm not really doing anything with what I'm getting incoming except for returning it. So again, I expect to return a string, so I'm going to return the string that's starting with a quote, and then I'm actually including the incoming string, and I'm saying it was a string. And I know that it is always a string because this method or this version of the method will always only run when I'm giving it a string. If I'm giving it an integer, Salesforce will know, Apex will know, hey, I can't use this method because it's expecting a string. Let me see if I can find one that is expecting an integer. And hey, there is one, so let's run this code. And in this case, I'm also returning, starting with a quote, I'm saying string dot value of my integer. So I'm actually using an overloaded method that Salesforce created that allows me to return a string with a value of any type of integer. In fact, this is interesting to see. If I just write string dot value of, you can actually see there's multiple methods that accept different types of inputs, which is exactly like writing string util dot return type name. And you can see exactly the same thing. It tells you, hey, I can accept 5 different types of data. So hopefully you're starting to understand how Salesforce does a lot of these things that you've seen behind the scenes and maybe never thought about. So all I'm doing here is I'm returning the string.value of my integer, which was the incoming integer. And I have the same thing with an ID, and I'm again using string.value of ID. I have the same thing for a date, and I'm using string.value of date, of the incoming date, and I have date time. And so let's go to our anonymous code again. And you'll see I created an empty string type name. And I'm saying type name equals to string util return type name, and I'm going to give it today's date. And if everything is well, it should actually go into this one, the date. Here I'm passing it a string. Here I'm passing it an integer, the number 10. And finally I'm passing a date time. I didn't really pass any ID, but we can do that as well. So let's see what happens when I run it. And of course I had a system.debug after each one of them to see what the result is. So the first one I actually left that alternate string, but then you can see it says 2016-10-13 was a date. Here I do words was a string. 10 was an integer, and this was a date time. So overloading methods is something that you end up doing a lot. Specifically, I think I almost always only use them in utility classes when I try to create something that can handle many different types of inputs. Something that I may be using from different places in different times. So does anybody have any questions about either the alternate class, the convert char class, or the overloading? Okay. Quiet is, I guess, either you guys are all staring at the screen saying, what the hell just happened?
We've got an incoming question.
Okay. So that's a very good question. What happens if we pass something that doesn't exist? So let's try and pass a decimal. Type name equals string util dot return type name, and let's pass 10.5. And why don't we use the system debug? And when I try to run it, lo and behold, it tells me method does not exist or incorrect signature. There's no method that accepts decimal in it. Now I could very easily go ahead, copy this exact thing. Instead of datetime, say, let's accept a decimal. And let's call it my decimal. We'll change the return string. And we don't even have to change anything else because string.valueOf knows how to handle decimals. Let me save that. And when I run it now, oh, it's still saving, sorry. Now it did run successfully. And when I look at my debug log, we can see that 10.5 was a decimal. So in other words, you always have to very specifically identify which types of data you're willing to accept when you overload a method. Okay, any other questions? Okay, Luke, back to you.
All right. I think tonight probably should be titled All About Arguments, or perhaps a nod to Monty Python, Argument Clinic. All of the different things we looked at were really dealing with classes passing arguments back and forth. We started with the Invocable Apex, and that was really binding our Apex classes to Process Builder. And then in Process Builder, using its ability to send record IDs, in this case, as arguments over to our method. And then looking at the alternate method two alternate method that Ohad created, really a lot of arguments flying back and forth throughout the classes that it uses. And then this really good example of overloaded methods, which is really just a way of saying the same method name with a different argument. And as might be implied from tonight, arguments are something that are really important to get very comfortable working with, because it is exactly what makes classes function with all of the data that we need to pass back and forth. And next week, we're going to expand on this, but also go back, sort of loop back and do our unit tests. And as we write our unit tests, we'll get some more chances to create methods, pass arguments back and forth between them. And we will also create the unit tests that will make the triggers we wrote last week and the Invocable Apex that we wrote this week pass and be deployable to production orgs.
Luke, are we meeting next week or 2 weeks from now?
Oh, sorry, 2 weeks from now. Yeah, okay. Now that Dreamforce is over and the holidays are far off, we should be able to have a good stretch of bi-weekly sessions uninterrupted. So I will start getting those invites out to everyone. And certainly, I will get an email out following this one with links to the documents that we looked at, the GitHub repos, and any other reference material we know of out there that will help you to further explore this topic. Before we go, are there any questions about anything we covered tonight? And I know we had a few late joiners, so if you want to stick around, I can certainly cover that with you as well, give you a brief review of what we did. But other than that, I thank everyone for coming tonight, and if you don't get an email by noon tomorrow, feel free to pester me, and I'll make sure to get that out to you.
Good night, everybody. By the way, we'll definitely try to get all of the previous lessons posted on my blog, and then I'll start tweeting about it and posting it wherever I can think and on the meetup. So you'll have one centralized place to look at it.
That would be great. Thank you.
Pleasure. Have a good night, everybody.
I'm going to stick around in case there are a few other questions. Arnold, if you had some questions about what went on tonight, I'll be glad to give you a quick review. Anyone else, welcome to stay. Otherwise, I'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
Do you want me to send you the code, or do you want me to just put it on GitHub?
Yeah, put it on GitHub would be great.
Okay. I'll send you a link later.
Hi, Luke. It's Arnold. I did show up late, and I feel bad asking questions.
That's
I just,
all right.
When I get, I typed in, I came in at the class, I came in when you were doing the class of PBB delete, and I get method does not exist or incorrect signature PBB utilities dot dedupe.
Ah, right, yes.
I went to the GitHub repository and I copied that in. So I have that class in my developer org, but I'm still getting method does not exist, which is...
Hey, Luke, I'm going to drop if that's okay.
That's fine. Thanks a lot, Ohad.
Okay. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Also, maybe the link to Ohad's blog, so I could, in the chat somewhere, might be good so we could get to it.
Yeah, in fact, I'm also going to take control back in the desktop here. And let's see, get back to developer console myself. Oh, did I close mine? Maybe I closed mine. I'll reopen my developer console. Now, one thing it might be is sometimes the compiler in the developer console just sort of loses track of where it is. You said you were working on the PBB delete class.
Yeah, I typed it all in, and my line 20 says for lead SO PBB utilities dot dedupe parentheses lead IDs. Let's see, yours is.
Oh, I think I cleaned that up. I was actually elaborating. It's nowhere near 20 lines long. It's considerably shorter. I have it up on my screen now. I know it's.
Yeah, if I take out the second class, trying to get the parentheses right, and not nuke anything I shouldn't. Wow.
What I suggest doing here in the conditions of the for loop, let's take out that reference to the utility class altogether, and let's start by just having it loop over record IDs.
Right. For string record ID, record IDs. Okay.
So the dedupe was really just sending that list off to that utility class, getting rid of any duplicates, and then bringing it back as a list of strings. So at this, we're just going to sort of take that out for right now, make sure everything else is hanging together and that it saves without that.
It did. It compiled and saved nicely.
Great. So now, and the PBB utilities has also saved successfully on its own?
I believe so. Let me add a comment and try and save. Yep.
I bet if you add it back in now to the PBB delete class, I bet it'll recognize it now. It may have just been that it the compiler hadn't caught up with the subsequent addition of the utilities class.
I guess that's asking a lot, eh?
Oh, I don't think it is, but I've seen it happen. In fact, that always happens to me when I'm working with Visualforce pages and controllers. I feel like I'm constantly having one that doesn't recognize that the other's been updated and saved, and often I just go back and forth and add a white space and save, and go to the other one and add a white space and save. Particularly when I know everything is correctly written, that it's really not likely that it's a typo.
Yep, you nailed it. That was the problem.
Yeah, it's just sort of some lag time, some latency in the compiler catching up with itself.
Well, so for my own purposes, I'm an admin looking to level up towards development, but as an admin, I've been using Process Builder, and it doesn't delete stuff. And so if I can add that functionality, that would help all the other admins in my org.
Exactly. That's exactly what this is geared to do, and particularly by making it generic, that it's not object specific. So this can work with any of them. And before the delete, we had looked at this other one called PBB lock, which allows you to use the record locking, kind of like you have in approval processes. So instead of having to create like a bogus approval process just to lock a record, you can use this Apex method of approval.lock and lock any record. And once again, this is generic, so it'll do it on any type of object.
So would you lock a record in Process Builder to make sure it's locked before you do more with it, or what's the use case?
No, like have you set up an approval process before?
I have, and it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah, but you can, like, when it's submitted for approval, you can lock the record so that no one makes changes. So this is just a way to do that without an approval process. Now, what scenario in your organization might require that, I couldn't say. And my company does online master's degrees, so I was thinking maybe I'll use this after the candidate has submitted their application. I was thinking, hey, I could use this to lock their application so nobody can change any of the fields on there until the university has had a chance to make the admit decision. I thought there's probably other scenarios where I'd use this. I did during the class, I used an example of a closed account. I set up a process builder with simple criteria that says if account name starts with closed, then it should call that Apex class and lock the record, which it do.
Cool.
Yeah, really, really powerful. And I had pointed out that in Apex development, we often will create what's called a feature toggle, and that way we can turn off a trigger or turn it back on. But by being able to hook Apex classes to Process Builder, we essentially get that with the deactivate and activate functionality. So it's a really convenient way to be able to create some complex logic that you can also turn off very easily.
That's a whole other thing. We have a custom setting in my org for that, and so it's just manage triggers. And
yeah, that's what we've used.
It's per user, but somebody else set it up before they actually left the company, and we use it for loading bulk records with demand tools. But I sort of question the logic of turning off trigger logic, right? I mean, like, it seems to me there ought to be a way to bulkify it so that we could not turn off the trigger logic when we're loading records, because it seems like the trigger logic, much like your immune system, it's actually there doing valuable work. Why suppress it?
Right, yeah, and ideally, you wouldn't have to turn a trigger on and off to do a normal job function like loading data, even if it is a large quantity.
Right.
There have been times when I've written things that there are just Salesforce limits to what I can do, and I've had to tell my users, if you're going to upload a list of leads of this type that we expect to be shared to a partner, you're going to have to set your batch size to 10 in data loader because I have to call out. But so I could see there being a case like that where you want to turn a trigger on or off.
Right.
But really, I would do my best to avoid those if possible and figure out how to do that.
The sneakiest thing I've ever seen was there was a blog somewhere that had a test class and a method, and the method was just like integer equals I++, and it just repeated itself. You know, you would create, I forget what the max number of lines is, but it was the hack for when you're trying to go home and you don't have code coverage to deploy. And it would just create a method that was like 3,000 lines long.
Oh man.
And like just all it did was math. It did nothing but math, but it was 3,000 lines long. So you would do that and then there's a test script for it, and then suddenly the amount of code deployed in your org is huge, and all your crappy triggers without code coverage still are okay because you've got this crazy long thing that is covered.
That's creatively lazy.
it was brilliant and evil all at once, which is you know.
Hopefully next week or 2 weeks, our next session on unit tests, I'll help people to at least learn how to hopefully avoid having to do that.
Right. Well, the guy said, don't make this a habit. Do it on Friday night and then come back to work Monday and fix your test code.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like if you really need to get it in there, and
nice.
you're so confident that it works.
Nice to have in your back pocket if you really need it.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of those little things that are out there. I've seen plenty of other ways to game unit tests.
Yep. All right. Well, I'm coming to New York first week in November to take dev training, week-long dev training. So
great.
But I can't say enough good about what you guys are doing there. This is so very,
we just put on the calendar today that we're going to do a developer user group meeting at Silverline November 1st. I think that's Tuesday, November 1st. So hopefully you'll be in town for that.
I'll try to. I have a girlfriend in New York City and a job in Boston, so I try to get. I spend weekends there a lot, but a little harder to pull off.
Hey, hi, this is Raghu here. I have one small question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is your previous webinar about Apex will explain me the basics of Apex, how to start with and everything? Or will be any other source where I can find this information to start with?
Yes. In fact, Ohad is going to put up links to all of the previous sessions, all of the recordings, and we started with the absolute basics. What is a string? What is an integer versus a decimal? We really wanted to make sure we were providing the building blocks necessary. Also, there's a couple other really good sites out there that have the same approach. womencodeheroes.org.
Let me write it down. Women Code Heroes.
I'll also send it around in the email. I'm sorry, womencodeheroes.com. In fact, I'll put it on my screen right now.
Okay. What do they have women? Good, great.
Yeah, this is a really good one. And it starts again with the absolute basics. And not only that, she does an impressive job of keeping the cooking metaphor going through in the entire lesson. And it works really well as an analogy for explaining this.
It really is a good blog. I've read it.
Nice.
Yeah. The other one is sfdc99.com.
Okay.
Mention those two.
Do you think it would be okay to put Ohad's link for his blog in the meetup or someplace? Because if he's going to post it all on his blog, I'll want to get there.
Yeah, we can add that to the meetup, and I know I've also been putting that into the information about our webinars on Ready Talk. Let's see
is that it? Force the Cloud?
Yeah, Force the Cloud.
That's his blog. Okay.
Pretty sure I have that in his presenter information. I'm looking at some of the previous ones here to make sure I do.
Will there be any links for Visualforce learning also, or you are planning to do any webinars or any meetups?
I probably won't go into Visualforce. I'm not nearly as well versed in Visualforce as I am with Apex, so I would be doing everyone a disservice. I almost feel like I need someone to do this for me for Visualforce to fill in all of the gaps that I haven't figured out.
So normally, person who is doing Apex won't do Visualforce or what? I mean, we are planning to step into a development area, so I don't know which one to concentrate more, or don't worry about Visualforce at all.
Definitely start with Apex because to do much of anything with Visualforce, you'll need to know Apex so you can write controllers.
Oh, okay.
And the type of things you do in Apex controllers are, I'd say, mostly similar to what we've been covering here for triggers and automation. And it'll give you a good basis for writing the controllers that we use in Visualforce. And you would not want to start trying to learn Visualforce first without learning Apex, because you would get nowhere pretty fast. But that said, you don't necessarily have to learn a whole lot of Apex to be able to make Visualforce work nicely.
Okay. Great.
And then once you have that, a little bit of both, then you can sort of work on each of them in turn and get better and better at both of them. And of course, now with Lightning coming on, we're going to be heaping on a lot more JavaScript for developing UIs in Salesforce. But everything we're learning with Visualforce and Apex will still apply in the Lightning experience.
Awesome.
All right. Well, if anyone has any more questions, now's the time. Otherwise, I think I'll be hopping on my bike and heading home.
No, just gratitude. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for your patience.
I'm returning the favors that folks in the past, like Jeff Gross and Jeff Douglas and Steve Anderson, gave to me 5 or 6 years ago, so that I could learn all this and get a nice career out of it. So, paying it forward.
Were you not a developer 5 or 6 years ago?
Oh no, I thought it was going to be a technical writer.
Yeah.
So Salesforce and Apex and the community saved me from a much more boring career.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Good.
Okay.
All right. I'll see you guys in 2 weeks, and don't hesitate to email me with any questions or bug me if I don't get all of the links out to you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.